Welcome. We will be discussing matters related to free trade and protectionism adopted by various governments, which was primarily adapted to give incentives to their domestic industry. Free trade is primarily trade without any burden, trade without any rule and regulation. The natural state of trade which happens between more than one country can be defined to be the free trade. Trade between various countries of the world has taken place for many centuries. 200 centuries back, 200 years back, India had trading relationship with Indonesia, parts of Africa, Ceylon, known as Sri Lanka. So originally trade enabled people of various walk to obtain food and materials related to survival, which they could not produce themselves. For example, United Kingdom doesn't have a climate suitable for producing banana, and therefore they need to import from abroad. More recently, it has been recognized that some countries are better at producing particular type of product than others. By better, we mean they can produce the product cheaply, quickly, and more efficiently. So, if somebody is producing them cheaply, quickly, and more effectively, which means they are producing it at an opportunity cost which is less than that of other countries. So that country will be better off trading the surplus goods and commodities to other countries. Because of that, the country exporting the commodity will be benefited, and at the same time, the country importing them is also going to be benefiting. Free trade is trade without any protection, without any barrier. Free trade encourages firms to export and import. This should encourage a greater choice for consumers and for higher standard of living. But how does free trade takes place? We'll take a simple example to understand the working of free trade. Suppose there are two imaginary countries in the world, Industria and Agriculturia. Industria is a industrial country primarily specializing in industrial products, and Agriculturia is a country which is primarily specializing in agricultural products. Industry is very efficient at producing electronic goods. Agriculture is less efficient in producing electronic goods, but very efficient in producing goods related to food product services. If both countries are self-sufficient, which means they don't want to produce more than what they consume, then there is no need of trade. So they produce for their only own self-consumption. By doing so, they will be using and utilizing the resources in a less sufficient manner. However, if industry specializes in producing electronic goods and agricultural is specializing in food grade products, each country's output will be greater than it would otherwise be. Each country can make the efficient use of available resources, and the total output of electronic goods and food products would be increased because they're not working for self-sufficiency anymore. In principle, because they're using more than self-sufficiency. The two countries can now trade the surplus goods to obtain the things that they are not producing for themselves. So whatever they are not producing for themselves, they will try to purchase from the other country. So both countries will then be better off. As people's income increase because of the reliance on surplus of commodities, they want to buy more luxury goods such as electronic goods. But once they have enough food to avoid being hungry, they don't need to buy extra food. They are self-sufficient. So whatever surplus commodity they have, they can exchange it for electronics and luxurious items. Therefore, countries that specialize in producing luxurious goods find that demand for their product grows over time and they got richer. Countries that specialize in producing agricultural commodity find that demand for their product remains stable or increase in a smaller manner, so their income remains almost equal. Compared with the countries making luxurious goods, conspicuous consumptions, the countries producing food become worse off. This problem is known as the problem of agriculture because the value of agriculture doesn't rise as similarly as to that of the rise in income of countries and individuals producing commodified goods. So by producing goods which were having more value, more worth in the international market and even in domestic market, these countries are becoming richer and richer. Like take the example of UK and Japan. They hardly depend upon agriculture for sustenance. In case of a country like United States, agricultural GDP is only 4% of their national GDP, which is very small. But take the case of India. The agricultural GDP is 30% of India's GDP. In case of Pakistan, it's 70%. So we are more reliant on agricultural products. Most of the population, 40 to 50% of population is engaged in agriculture. Because of that, there is a problem of employment also. But there are some problems with free trade. Free trade means without competition, and competition can be risky, particularly when it affects a country's prosperity. Countries often want to protect themselves against effects of free trade. They can make foreign goods more expensive by imposing taxes, which means that consumer has to pay more if they want to purchase the foreign goods. This protects the people in their own country who produce those goods at a higher cost because they don't have to compete against cheaper foreign goods. Trade has never been free because some countries have taken steps to protect themselves, their own industries, their own individuals, their citizens. However, as we shall see below, the trade is freer in some countries than it is for some others. There are several ways countries can protect themselves from free trade. Countries can place a limit on the number of imported goods of a particular type that can be imported during a year. These are known as quotas. They can keep a particular amount as a quota so that individuals, traders, exporters are not allowed to import goods for more than that quantity. For example, cotton farmers in the USA are protected by quota system. US government tries to ensure that these farmers receive a stable income. If the price of raw cotton in USA falls below a certain level, then the US government will begin to limit the amount of cotton imported into the country because more supply is available and there is less demand, price comes down. So by limiting the import amount, you can raise the demand because demand remaining same, supply remaining lesser, you can raise the demand. This makes life difficult for the cotton farmers in United States. So because of uncertainty from what they are actually going to get by selling their own commodities, to avoid this uncertainty, US government will limit the supply or import of cotton from outside of United States so that a particular price can be maintained by the cotton farmers of United States. A similar import quota is also in place in case of sugar in United States. Quotas restrict imports of goods to a certain quantitative level. They are considered harmful and banned by World Trade Organization. Still, it exists in many forms because not all countries are members of WTO. Countries like Iran, Iraq, Russia, Ukraine, and many more, Latvia, Lithuania, are outside that of WA. They're not members of World Trade Organization. So that's why the rules and regulations employed by WTO is not applicable to them. So even if WTO has gotten rid of the import quota, they still exist in the world market. Secondly, many members of the WTO are allowed to keep the quota system, which were existing already at the time of implementation of abolition of quota system by WTO, so that some countries like United States and UK, they can keep the quota system for a specified period of time. So for the absolute abolition of quota system, we need that all the countries of the world should be under WTO, and they should not be allowed to maintain the quota system for some amount of time. Thirdly, the international trade in textiles and apparel is profoundly distorted by multi-fiber arrangements. Because of multi-fiber arrangement, this is an international trade agreement on textile and clothing that was active from 1974 to 2004. The agreement imposed quotas on the amount of uh, imports made to parts of Europe and United States from developing countries, which can be done in the form of yarns, cotton fabrics, and clothing. Under the multi-fiber arrangement, the United States and the European Union restricted imports from developing countries in an effort to protect their own domestic industries. Under the arrangement, each developed country was assigned a particular quota or a quantity of a specified item which can be exported from developing countries like Indonesia, India, even China at some places to the United States and European Union. And this was active till 2004. There is another case of a system of protectionism which goes by the name of subsidy. This is a very popular solution to local producers. Subsidies are sums of money given by the government to producers because their production costs are low. These producers can afford to sell their products more cheaply than foreign goods imported into their country. They produce at a high cost, but because of the government subsidy, they find the cost of production going down, thereby reducing the production cost of these products produced locally. That makes them cheaper than the imported commodities. So making international commodities uncompetitive in the domestic market. For example, in the United States, peanut butter is very popular. Some countries can grow peanut butter more cheaply than United States. The climate is suitable for like that of Brazil. Wages are also low. They can easily sell these peanut butters to the United States, but then US peanut farmers might go out of business because the cost of production of United States farmers are much more than Brazilian units. To prevent the domestic peanut farming industry from strangulating, the United States government gives specific amount of subsidies in the form of refund of money, so that the cost of production of these farmers actually comes down and they become competitive suddenly in the domestic market because imported goods become costlier in, in inside the markets of United States. But there is a legitimate question that why should a country not protect their farmer from free trade? Because free trade will kill some of the industries. It will kill some of the farmers, not the farmers, but also some of the producers or industrial manufacturers. You could say that it's okay for countries to protect their own producers. However, in that case, all the countries should be allowed to do this. At the moment, the trade rules are unfair. Some countries are forced to accept goods from abroad, while others are allowed to protect their markets with import tariff, quotas, and subsidies. There is not a level playing field. The field is uneven. the number of players are skewed in favor of the developed countries. For example, the European Union pays a subsidy to sugar beet farmers. This encourages them to produce so much sugar that EU accounted for 40% of world sugar exports in 2001. This means that countries such as Mozambique, which actually produce sugar more cheaply, have trouble selling their sugar. So free trade is not practicable because subsidies are given by European Union, which makes production cheaper. Actually, they are not cheaper. The production cost is costlier. But because of the subsidy, because of the monetary being given back by the European Union to these farmers, it suddenly becomes cheaper, which is actually not good for world trade. Protectionism is government action and policies of certain states, countries in the world, which restricts and restrains to a certain extent international trade. It is done with the intention of protecting indigenous local businesses. Typical methods include import tariffs, quotas, subsidies, and tax cuts, which gives benefits arising out of trade to local businesses. So this is a kind of state intervention. To protect your own, you must kill others. To protect your own industry, you must kill foreign industry. So anytime a particular government undertakes any of these actions, they are engaging in protectionism. There is a significant debate surrounding the merit of protectionism. Critics argue that over a long period of time, protectionism, these measures, often ends up hurting people it is intended to protect and promotes free trade as a superior alternative to protectionism. But there are some areas which has been developed all over the world as free trade areas. These same countries adopt protectionism, but for their own benefit, they have actually tried to bring into place a large region under a free trade tariff without tariff barrier, place where nationals of certain countries can trade without tariff quotas. So free trade area is an area which a group of country invokes little or no price control. Free trade area allow the agreeing nations to focus on their competitive advantage and freely trade the goods they lack the experience at making, thus increasing efficiency and profitability of each country. So jute produced by Bangladesh can be freely traded in India without any having to pay for any duty if there is a free trade area between India and Bangladesh. Similarly, softwares made, hardwares made, electronic equipments made in India can be traded, can be sold in Bangladesh without having to pay for any import tariff. One of the most well-known free trade area was created because of the signing of North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994. This agreement was made between Canada, United States, Mexico, and encourages trade between these North American neighbors. The agreement was signed in 94 and was hence created one of the largest free trade areas all over the world. And this is fairly successful. But there are certain kind of protectionism rules which are creative in nature at some places, but fundamentally they block international trade to a certain extent. One of the protectionism type is VAS, voluntary export restraint. This is an agreement between an exporting country and importing country in which the importing country doesn't put a quota restriction, but instead it asks the exporting country to put a quota restriction, to put a limit to the quantity of exports of a specific good below a certain level. This is usually done to avoid the imposition of legal restrictions by the importing country. Because WTO has disallowed the quota system. So importing country cannot put a quota on the export, but the exporting country can be actually allowed, and this is perfectly legal even by the WTO standards, that it imposes a self-restraining voluntary export restraint order. Since quotas are banned by WTO, it cannot be uh, implemented by the importing country. For example, an importing country such as US wants to negotiate with exporting countries such as Japan to voluntarily limit the amount of product to be exported out of Japan. So that US is not putting the import quota, but Japan is putting an export quota voluntarily on its own. So it remains legal even under WTO regulations. The next set of protectionism measures are administrative barriers. When goods are being imported, these are usually going through administrative processes. It takes time. Sometimes, because of the bureaucratic hurdle, popularly known as red tape corruption measures, a government tries to slow down the process of valid imports. If these processes are lengthy and complicated, then they act as a restriction to imports, because the exporter in the domestic country will be very frustrated with the delay in the timings. Foreign exchange value is changing. So this acts as a barrier to trade. Health and safety standards. This is where various restrictions are placed upon the types of goods that can be sold in the domestic market, or on the methods used in the manufacture of certain goods. These regulations will apply to imports and may restrict their entry. For example, certain countries in the European peninsula has actually put a restriction on import of certain kind of uh, masalas like chili pepper, a particular kind of chili powder, which cannot be exported to countries like UK and Germany. Similarly, United States has said that a particular kind of drug been manufactured by Ranbaxy laboratory in India by the name of Lipitor cannot be imported into United States. So this is a kind of health and safety standard adopted by a particular domestic country, which prevents trading from another exporting country. So it restricts the amount of trade that can actually happen, whereas the actual amount of uh, export that can happen is long, but deliberately they keep it smaller. The next point is embargoes. This is one of the restrictive practices. In effect, an embargo is an extreme quota, abolition of total trade. If a country checks a ban on another country's exports, it's known as an embargo. It's a kind of political punishment given to one country because of lack of coordination between two governments. For example, the United States has a complete trade embargo on all products from Cuba. So the Cuban people cannot export any commodity, even the sugars and the cigars. Cuba is famous for its cigars and sugars. They cannot be exported into the United States. Some nationalistic campaigns are also taken up by certain governments to make people remember that foreign goods are not good. Governments will sometimes run marketing campaigns to encourage people to buy domestic goods instead of foreign ones, in order to generate more demand for domestic goods and preserve domestic jobs, and thereby preserving valuable foreign exchange also. Such campaigns has happened in countries like UK, Australia and US. This may be described as a moral suasion, where the government links consumption of imported goods to creation of unemployment. This is partially true, but against international trade. So we have discussed lots of things about international trade, how free trade can happen, and how countries come up with new plans, new systems to put a curb on the system of international trade. Protectionism is good, but in certain pages. Moreover, protectionism impedes the development of world trade. Things which can be made as surplus are actually forced upon the domestic market to consume it, thereby losing valuable foreign exchange which can be reinvested. So, international trade normally enables a country to specialize in the skill, in the usage of a particular commodity and ability. But a country with comparative advantage in better endowment and resources and human resource and material can be able and should be allowed to produce surplus commodities which it can trade with its neighbors and compete in the world market. So international trade is like being liberalized, but everything comes at a price. International trade should be allowed unhindered for overall development of world trade, and particularly for the development of smaller economically weaker regions of the world like Western Africa. We're coming to the conclusion. I hope you do more research on the subject, get more inputs, and has a better understanding. Till the next session, thank you very much and bye bye.